Welcome to the Employer Branding Show, interviews with employer branding and recruitment practitioners to help you kickstart your own hiring efforts. Today, we are joined by Dylan Lees-Jones, the European and UKI Recruitment Marketing Manager at Wipro. Dylan, great to have you on the Employer Branding Show today.
Thanks for inviting me today, James.
Not a problem. I love the fact that you've got the world behind you. There just shows probably the amount of countries that Wipro might be working in at the moment. So for those of us who don't know more about you and what you do, can you give me some insight into who are you, what do you do at Wipro, and
Sure.
Maybe a little bit about your career?
No, sounds good. So as you say, my name's Dylan Lees-Jones. I'm the UK and Ireland and European Recruitment Marketing Manager for Wipro. I've been there about 7 months. And, it's fantastic to be there. I think that, when I look at my career's sort of been a mix of sort of agency side, client side, but obviously I'm now working for a very, very large corporate, something that I didn't have before. And, we've got a huge challenge ahead of us, but it's also quite an exciting challenge. In terms of sort of my background, I have worked in marketing throughout my entire career, so I majored in it at university and never sort of looked back. I got into the world of data and creative in my very early days, and that was an amazing sort of entry, if you like, into the industry. But as we all know, digital has been a real focus for many organisations over the past sort of 15, 20 years. And I bring about 5 years worth of recruitment marketing experience. I think a lot of recruiters say that they fall into it. Obviously, I'm not a recruiter myself, but I found myself working in this sector just by chance. I've worked in a lot of sectors, I just haven't worked in recruitment. And as I said, I've been doing it for about 5 years and just love it. And this is where I sort of see where my future will be, working in recruitment for the foreseeable future.
That's fantastic. It's interesting the way that you say you've fallen into it, because I'm speaking to lots of people as I'm recording this show, in employer branding as a kind of catch-all. And everybody seems to have their own route into this, either being a recruiter or working in marketing or social media or brand. Can you explain that journey that you made from pure play marketing into employer branding, or employer marketing as it might be called?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not sure if I can explain it, but I think one of the things that I did very early on in my career, after having been through some sort of where companies streamlined and made changes and head counts dropped, etc. I don't like using the R word. I decided to go into the world of contracting. And what contracting did for me was that I was able to work in so many different industries, something that I'd never really had the chance, or probably would never have had the chance to have done if I hadn't gone contracting. So in many ways, I was able to fast track my career, and I was able to tick off, right, I've worked for this type of business. I've worked in financial services. I've worked in charity. I've worked in retail. I've worked in hospitality. And I just really liked the sort of the different challenges that each industry presented. And then when somebody came to me saying, I can see that you're so worldly in terms of you've worked in so many different industries and your skill sets are so interchangeable across in terms of being transferable. Somebody said, would you ever consider working in recruitment? And I said, I'd do it, because it's just another huge challenge for me to be able to bring my marketing skill set to a very different industry. And with that, you learn so many other skills. So I didn't know what an ATS is. Obviously, I knew what a CMS was, but I had no understanding of an ATS system, and I had no understanding of job board marketing. So again, it was another feather in my cap. So in some ways, was it intentional? It probably was, and I know to just sort of upskill and to be as marketable as possible. So maybe I didn't just fall into it. It was always open to take on a different challenge. But I think now that I've got about 5 years worth of experience of working on recruitment marketing campaigns, or how we can develop an employer brand, I just feel it's been something that I've just enjoyed so much. I mean, I've had some brilliant times working in other industries, but there's something about recruitment, I don't know why, because it's always throwing different curveballs at us. So I think that's why it's probably something that, it remains unfinished business. And I think after COVID, we're now seeing so many different tech stacks coming out now to try and take employer brand to the next level, because there's still this war on talent. I think it's quite an exciting time to be in recruitment marketing. So I'm looking forward to the next few years anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree that there's such a battle happening in talent and the approaches. Like, nobody knows what the world's going to look like. Nobody knows how you're supposed to recruit in the right kind of ways, and there's lots of different approaches that are out there, which makes what I'm doing quite fun, which is just shining a light on people, because everyone seems to have a different idea about how to do it. What's your, for a lot of people, employer branding is still very nascent. So there's lots of companies that don't even think about employer branding, and they could be 100, 200, 300 people strong, and they still actually haven't got round to doing it yet, which is a whole conversation in itself. But how do you approach employer branding for businesses that you worked for, or where you are at the moment? Is there a kind of process that you go through to see what's working and kind of move up a hierarchy?
100%. I think the first point, James, that you mentioned is I've worked for some businesses that don't even actually understand what employer branding is. So you first of all have to make sure that people within that business, senior stakeholders, really understand what we mean by it, and not to confuse it. But a lot of people interchangeably use employer branding in the same guise as an EVP. They are two very, very different things. Yes, they are connected, but they are two very different things. But in terms of the sort of the question that you've posed to me, I think where I come from, that world of sort of contracting and working in sort of a planning mindset, a campaign mindset, an account management mindset, I think the approach that I take is very, very similar to everything I do. And that is, you always have to start with an audit. I don't think there's one size fits all. You have to understand, and, I often use them all the way. Where are we now? Where do we need to be, and how are we going to get there? Those classic three questions, right? Where are we now? And the first thing I do to answer where are we now is to perform an audit. And so I look at things like our career site, which is a massively important digital touch point for us, understanding, what does that candidate journey look like? What are the supporting analytics? I will then look at things like our EVP, which is obviously the benefits that look to attract talent, whereas the career site is obviously a perception, reputational touch point. We also see what people are saying about us, and if we're listening to them on social media, so very much about, what are those communications going out to candidates, and how do we listen to them in terms of that stewardship piece. So all of these sorts of things, whether it's career site analysis, EVP, social media surveys, exit interviews, just talking to people around a business when I've gone in there as a contractor. What do you think of the business? Why have you stayed here for 5 years? Were you promoted? Have you had a pay rise? All of those sorts of things. And then I also then combine that with what the competition are doing. So that competitor analysis is massively important to say, look, there are some huge big ticket items here coming out of this audit, and at the moment you are well behind the curve. These people are absolutely marching ahead in these areas. And then I think those approaches, or those actions, if you like, inform your approach. And I think this is where the next challenge is. You've got all of this information, and then it's deciding, right, how do I go to the senior management to say, right, I've been here for X amount of time. These are your biggest problems, and list them, your classic SWOT. But then you need to present it in a way saying, look, I believe these are your bigger ticket, your top three, and these are the resources and the budgets that I need. And who knows, 9 times out of 10, you might get a lot of it rejected. But I think that's really the next job, to then say, this is where we need to be. This is where we need to be in the next 6, 9, 10 months, or almost putting a short-term, long-term, and that sort of roadmap piece for the next couple of years. And I think at Wipro, that's been a big challenge for me, in terms of sort of, should we say, in engaging with those people who hold the purse strings. But, we're making some progress. So, the next 12 months is going to be quite an interesting time.
And are you, during that process of auditing, I'm guessing you're collecting the information that you need to advocate for employer branding. I'm guessing you are an advocate of employer branding, and if you had an unlimited budget, you would do all these things. But there's always a kind of a budgetary case, an economic case to be made for doing certain things. in that process.
But without a doubt, I mean, that's the sad challenge that I think we face with a lot of brands, but budgets, as we know, it's a cost. And some people think, is it really necessary? But I think the point about employer brands is if you're not creating noise and you're not communicating some of the things that the top talent are wanting to, hear about and read about, you're missing a massive opportunity to try and attract brilliant talent. So I use our career site as just an example, okay? It's a huge digital touch point for any prospect. People are going to go, if somebody is in the market for looking for a job, or even if they're at that pre-search, where are they going to go? Yeah, sure, they're going to go to things like Glassdoor, they're going to go onto our profile page, maybe on Indeed. They possibly might ask somebody down the pub. They will visit our career site, and that career site is a huge touch point for us in terms of, does it provide them with the information that they need? And if it doesn't, that's going to create a lot of concern in the mind of a candidate saying, well, I can't find any information on diversity and inclusion. There's no information here around learning and development and training. And I'm a bit worried, why can't I find this kind of information? So the perception is it that you just don't have any thoughts and ideas on that? And then when you do visit another career site or speak to somebody, they can provide you with that information that makes that company so special. It gives you the inside take on their culture, why their culture is so important, what you can expect in your first 6 months, all of that kind of thing. And I say that the thing that I'm focusing on, or will be focusing on, is content marketing. And I think it is one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people face. It's being able to provide relevant, timed content that people want to read about sort of every day, every week. And I think that that's one of our biggest challenges. There's always something out there. And I think when you can have those evergreen articles, those standard articles that talks about standard policies or whatever it may be, that's great. But as a business, we're going to constantly evolve. We have to keep pace with what other employers are doing. So for me, content is going to be a key feature for us. And I've got a few things that we're already talking to a number of vendors about. So that's why I think it's going to be quite an exciting 12 months.
That's really interesting. So for you, the big hub or the biggest lever, that's all I was trying to think of, is the thing that's going to impact your employer brand the most is the careers website, the careers page, because that impacts everything else. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, you put me on the spot there. I would say that the career site is a massive feature for us, but it's not limited to that. Obviously, I might come back to you in 6 months saying we've done a little bit more work and actually we feel that this is the strongest. But when you look at some of the traffic and some of the engagement on our site, it needs to be much, much stronger. But I think it goes so much further than that. I think that, we're working on our job descriptions, our job ads, because that's another representation of our employer brand. So even if we've got jobs advertised on key job boards, that is that first person's impression. They might not have heard of Wipro, because one of the things with Wipro that we've struggled with is our brand awareness in certain geos. So for us, we need to build that brand awareness. And I think we can do that very well with a great job description, which obviously, or even a great job ad for that matter. And so one of the things that we've been focused on is looking at lunch and learns with our TA teams, where we can get them to really think very differently about that job description, how we can go about crafting it to attract talent. And that's where I brought my marketing mindset in terms of, when you write an ad, you have to think of, I call it AIDA or AIDICA. So you need to build attention, you need to build the interest, you need to build the desire, the conviction, and the action. What do you want people to do as a result of reading this ad? Now, that could be something that sits on, in Indeed or a Total Jobs. So you could say, yes, in many respects, it's not always about the career site, but because we are trying to attract so many good people out there, we need to make sure that our career site, our job ads, what we're saying on social media really represents us as an employer of choice and a culture that, is represented. Because again, I haven't really touched on it, but diversity and inclusion is a massive topic at the moment. And so at the moment, career site, I feel, is a big thing. I think if we can sort that out, we can put that to bed, and then we can move on to something else where we can be out there, producing a blog or producing more relevant content on our social media threads. And we are limited at the moment, and I feel that that's a big challenge for us. We shouldn't just be limited to things like the Twitters of this world, the Facebooks and the LinkedIns, because we're an IT provider. These IT communities reside on other IT communities' sort of social media boards, and we need to understand that, whether that's the Reddits of the world. So there's lots for us to learn. I wouldn't limit it just to a career site, but I'd say our career site is a big priority for us at the moment.
So diplomatically put, Dylan. What's the way, if you've got sign off, well, if you're doubling down on that content piece on your career site, how do you, and this is the question that all employer branders hate, but how are you measuring the return on that work?
So it's a very, very good question. And I'm going to just come out with it straight away and say I don't know. And when I say I don't know, I can't turn around and say, right, this recruitment blogger or content storyteller is charging us X amount a month, okay? But what I would go back to the business and say is since we've employed this person as a guest writer or even employed them as part of the marketing team, we are seeing the number of people signing up to job alerts and applying for roles has gone through the roof. Yeah, we're noticing that traffic is going through the roof. We're finding that more people are now staying online. Our blogs are the most visited pages. They are the pages that are most shareable. We're now finding when we do unprompted response to people, have you heard of Wipro? More people are buying into it. They've heard of us. So it's one of those things that where we might be charged £1,000 a blog, you could say, well, guess what? That £1,000 a blog, we don't have to go down an agency who will charge us £5,000 for every placement. So it's almost this argument over sort of earned media rather than paid media, if that makes sense. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we face for a lot of people who don't have that quality in their database or can't find it through direct sourcing on LinkedIn, it actually comes down to writing problem-solving solutions on a blog. When I say this, the blog, in my opinion, is still that silver bullet when it comes to your content marketing, because it's ultimately producing relevant time content about big problems that people can't solve. So that would be my argument there, because it's very difficult to say, well, for every blog that we get charged £1,000, we bring in £10,000 worth of talent. It's a really difficult calculation to work out. But hopefully what I've just said in terms of the impact that it has, that would be my way of justifying that investment.
I think the point you've kind of roundabout made there, that anybody else that's thinking about doing employer branding or investing in employer branding, is it's difficult to actually measure any ROI. And if you're looking at it from a purely stats perspective, you're probably looking at it the wrong way. And you actually want to be just building it. It's going to help. It's going to help your recruiters. It's going to help build your team if you're building it in the right kind of way, using the right kind of, building the right things first, foundational, and then building up on top of that. Interesting, very interesting. I could probably talk to you for another couple of hours on this, but I know we're on a deadline. I've got some other quick fire questions to ask you. Is that okay?
Far away.
Yeah, awesome. What's your tech stack that you use for employer branding?
So we have an ATS system, which I wouldn't necessarily say is sort of it's part of that hiring process. So whether we want to say that that's part of the employer branding in many ways, I suppose it probably would be, because once you've applied for a job, you're now on that sort of that hiring process pipeline. Obviously, you're not being onboarded, you haven't been offered, but we use an ATS called iSIMS, and that's obviously crucial for us, that when they do, having read our career site and that career site's done the job, which is to then send people to an application to apply for it, we use that, and we use that in a way where we have to keep communicating to that candidate throughout that process. We don't want them to drop off. We want them to start an application. We want them to complete an application. And then they go through that hiring process, and then all being well, they get offered a job, but that process still doesn't stop. They could still drop out of that onboarding stage as we verify them. So for us, in many ways, the ATS is an absolutely crucial part of the employer branding experience, because if you apply for a job and it's taking you 100 days to get through a process, that's not a very good, employer brand experience, in my opinion. So for us, the ATS is obviously vital for that. In terms of sort of other tech stacks, I mentioned to you about our career site, which again is on iSIMS. We use a suite of job boards, not just here in the UK, but also in Europe. We have an employee referral scheme, which is obviously crucial for us. You tend to find that people will trust friends, family friends, colleagues more than maybe a recruiter or something. So the employee referral, email marketing, for want of a better term, is really important. We've touched on LinkedIn. Our LinkedIn license obviously is very important to us. And then also what we have done is that we've provided some LinkedIn training, but more from a personal brand perspective. So one of my roles has been Learn and Lunch, or Lunch and Learns rather, where it's not just about knowing how to use LinkedIn from a recruiter perspective to find talent, doing those Boolean searches, but it's making absolutely sure that candidates understand that they have a responsibility for their own personal brand. And what I mean by that is having an authoritative picture, having a headline, and making sure that your experience is updated and that you're touching on all the different features that you get as part of a LinkedIn license. And also I've demonstrated to them about how they need to go about crafting a post. So we've talked a little bit about job ads. Well, job ads also are something very important to LinkedIn, and it's all about how we craft those and how we make great use of hashtags and at mentions and things like that. So that would be the sort of tech stack that I say that we do use. But in terms of moving forward, I want to take that to the next level where we can have AI-powered blog content. So making sure that we're writing about relevant content. Video content is something that we're talking about a lot, and we're talking to a vendor at the moment about that. And then my love of marketing in terms of digital is the challenge of SEO and Google Ads. So very much a sort of search engine marketing strategy, and then finishing off with looking at things like paid social, and also working with online publications where we can join with them in terms of partnerships. So those would be the other sort of tech stacks that we're looking at the moment.
Awesome. I really like what you're doing around the personal branding piece and the video piece, because I think that LinkedIn lends itself to people being personal brands, irrespective of their involvement in recruitment or not, but and how that actually aids recruitment in having people that are content producers, that are making content about the work that they're doing. It will indirectly attract people that are aligned with the work that you're doing anyway. So working on that, I think, is key. And there's lots of companies that miss out on doing that. The video work that you're going to be doing, is that going to be like agency looking at kind of creating branded videos, or more kind of authentic, kind of real-time videos with your team?
Well, all of it has to be authentic. It's going to be.
Catch-all term.
It's going to be sort of a bit Blair Witch. I mean, we can go down the route of producing some very professional ones, but I think people buy into those authentic stories. And the stars of the shows will be the employees. That's what it's all about. So we are working with a vendor who has a piece of software that's on a license, and that will give us the opportunity to ultimately have 4 users who can use it across their geos, UK hopefully being one. And that's where we will put our trust in our recruiters to sell the benefits of working at Wipro. And it won't just be limited to recruiters. This is going to be something that we're going to use across the business. So leaderships, senior stakeholders within the business, other managers within the business who don't necessarily deal with recruitment. It's trying to demonstrate to us as, who Wipro are. And we go out there on One Wipro, Be Bold. We've just come up with a new initiative called Ambitions Realise, which is all about realising, your true sort of self in terms of what you can bring to the party, and how Wipro can enable that for you to obviously drive your career forward. So it's sort of marrying up that sort of internal brand message and communicating that through some really powerful bite-sized videos. So, these are sort of part of the roadmap piece, and that's why I was saying I think the next 12 months is going to be quite interesting for Wipro.
Wonderful. Music to my ears. And I'm betting there's loads of companies out there or loads of people in employer branding that would listen to this and think, wow, that's so, we've got nothing, and you're so far in front of them. But it's just good to know that you don't have to do all of that, but you just be inspired by that and start moving along the journey until you're until you're at that point. Really exciting, and we'll have to do a conversation in 12 months or so just to see how things have evolved. In that time, Dylan. Okay, so on that point, someone that's just trying to get started in employer branding, have you got a recommended book that they could read just to kind of get the juices flowing?
Absolutely. I had the privilege of meeting this chap, so I'm just putting it up. It's probably coming up backwards, but he's called Greg Savage, Savage Truth. He has his own blog now. As you can see, I haven't quite finished it, but if anyone was looking to get into, as you say, employer branding or even recruitment, this is a really, really good book. He writes beautifully, quite simply, but again, as I said, he's got a blog that you can sign up to if you follow him on LinkedIn. But what I would say about Greg is that he talks about the challenges that he faced in his very early career about recruitment. And he talks about some of the changes that we need to be mindful of and how to survive and how we need to think differently, because recruitment has changed massively. If you look at the last sort of 20, 30 years, I mean, I remember my first job, I was applying for jobs out of magazines and recruiters were always there speaking to me, whereas now there's all sorts of challenges in terms of being ghosted and what have you, and jobs that are fake and don't exist. But he talks about all of that, and he talks about how, we as professionals have to really represent the industry, in the most professional way. Do not follow the crowd. But some really interesting anecdotes that he told me about when I had the privilege of meeting him a few years ago was that I think this is more directed as a recruiter. We have to be more switched on. We have to be more social and accessible. And what we mean by that is don't hide behind a job board. Don't hide behind a telephone. You need to make sure that you are permanently switched on these social networks and that you're accessible. Yeah, and that's the one thing that we have to. You can't just hide behind these traditional forms of media. You are an ambassador for your employer. And he talks about too many recruiters just chase the pounds, and eventually it catches up with you. You need to be switched on. And I think the reason he says you have to be switched on is because the great recruiters out there now are more aware of spotting pre-search candidates. And what we mean by that, they know, they can see the propensity in a candidate who is more likely going to be thinking, I'm going to be changing jobs in 6 months, and great recruiters know that. And his point is also to do with the fact that when you see people out there on job boards having uploaded their CV, these are what he refers to as active candidates, and that's fine. We have to go beyond that because active candidates fill about 10% of all roles. The other 90% are people that we know nothing about, and there are roles out there that aren't even advertised, and that's why he talks in his book at length about how we have to spot those changes. So it's some really wonderful stories. I would recommend, as I say, The Savage Truth. I probably haven't done him justice, but it's a really good book that talks about those kinds of things.
Yeah, I'm aware of Greg. He's Australian.
He's actually South African. His book starts with how he was brought up in South Africa, but then he moved to Australia when he was quite young. I think he calls himself an Australian now, but I'd leave that to Greg. But from what I understand, he's actually by birth he's a South African, but he's a fully fledged Aussie now.
Fantastic. And I have seen quite a bit of his content, but it's interesting what you say there and that point about being active, because I bet, well, my big thing with this is that there's probably, I don't know, there's so many thousands of recruiters just in the UK, and so few of them, and they probably spend 8 hours a day on LinkedIn, but so few of them are actually using LinkedIn correctly. As a platform, like creating content, commenting on content, creating discourse. It's all using the recruiter product without building any kind of brand. Absolutely. And that will you'll only discover people that are active on LinkedIn that way, whereas you won't discover, as you say, those kind of passive lurkers.
You were 100% correct. I couldn't have put it better than that. That's exactly what he's saying. You can't just use it for use's sake. There is so much you can be doing. I mean, I was talking to a recruiter not so long ago, and he was telling me how he had spent the last 2 weeks trying to find candidates for a role, and he had gone out there with 800 in-mails. And I said, it's pointless. You know that they're not going to be there. You need to think about how you're using this tool. And when I asked him about how many posts does he put out there challenging his industry, he said, I have never written a post. And I said, how are you going to build that authority up? How, if anything, I think Greg talks about, the more that you invest in your own personal brand, these people will come to you. And they'll come to you because they'll start liking your content, they'll start following you, they'll get a connection, there'll be an introduction. And he said that is a great recruiter who is absolutely owning his personal brand, rather than, as you say, just using the features of the tool to just send emails and search for people. You need to own your personal brand, and that's what he talks about quite a bit.
It's that kind of marketing attention funnel, isn't it?
It
and
is,
you can't game it here. You need to build it at the top there.
Great.
Great points. Okay, last little quick question. I could talk to you for hours, Dylan. Who's an up and comer in recruitment or in employer branding? Do you think that we should be keeping an eye on for the future?
So I would say that the one person, I mean, there are lots of great people that I've come across, but I would say she's called Emily Forbes, Forbes, and she is the CEO of CNET. CNET being SEENIT, CNET. So CNET's an employee crowdsourcing video platform. So I mentioned to you earlier about video content, and she is absolutely bossing it when it comes to producing. When I say producing, she provides you with the platform for you to use it. I've seen the tool. It's an absolutely wonderful tool. And I think for me, it should be on every recruitment marketeer's sort of shopping list of sort of, budget, if you like. And, that's our hope, our big hope over the next 12 months, to bring a tool on like this. And as I said, this is where we can be in control of our own content. And when I say control, we will produce this content in-house using her platform. It's all going to be sort of all about the employees. We can do lots of sort of polished professional videos, but we can also just do some what I would call sort of unpolished Blair Witch videos. And that's the beauty of this tool. You can do some bite-sized cut down ones, but you can also do some very lovely long-term videos. So the tool is great. It's got all the whizzes and the video editing suite. So we're looking forward to that. But Emily has been right behind it from, I think she's been running the business for maybe possibly 8 years, and she has a background in video production, and she saw how expensive video production is. So she wanted to think, right, we need to come up with something really simple. And she's targeted the employer branding industry. And, it's not cheap, but then again, it's far more cost effective than employing a production company to produce, videos of yours every time you want it. And I think the other good thing about Emily is that she's so easy to speak to. She's just a really lovely person, and she's a real authority in employer branding. I've learned a lot from her. And recently she was over in Lisbon for the World Employer Branding event that was over in Portugal for about 3 days. And she came back and she told me quite a few things about things that she learned. And then I would sum up Emily as well, is that she produces some really good webinars. And that's how I came to meet her, probably about 2 years ago. I came across her, and she has lots of sort of events, webinars, where she brings in a leading speaker from possibly Google or PayPal or whatever. And she asks them the same questions, and the take is very, very different. So she's a really interesting lady. So, she gets my approval. And I would say, if you're not following her yet, start following Emily Forbes, and maybe even get a demo in, because you'll be really impressed with her tool.
Yeah, I haven't come across Emily before, but I certainly will reach out to her and follow her content now. And I think that, the more we can find platforms that enable these kind of employee-generated content, the better it's going to be for most, for a lot of businesses out there. Because otherwise there's a big struggle of, getting people involved in the process. And I think the tool should make it as fun as possible.
Yeah,
definitely. Dylan, if anybody watching this or listening to this might want to reach out and talk to you a little bit more about employer branding, what's the best way of people finding you? on the web?
Probably the best way is you can probably see my name on the end here, how my name is spelled. Link in with me. Is probably the best way. As I said, I'm active on LinkedIn, believe it or not. So if you want to send me an email or a connection request or something like that, do that. And more than happy to speak to somebody who's having a few challenges with employer branding or any thoughts on how they can get into recruitment. Be more than happy to spend some time with them.
Wonderful. I'll definitely put a link up on the show notes so people can reach out and say hello. And thank you so much for sharing your insight. It's been fantastic to talk to you. And maybe, as I said, in 12 months' time we can do a round 2 and see what impact all the efforts that you're making at Wipro has had. Because it's fantastic talking to you today.
Good stuff. Well, thanks for talking to me, and I'll speak to you soon, I'm sure, James.